Okay, there's Julia. Perfect. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stacy Brennan. I am the curator of education for the Lehigh University Art Galleries. We are a free museum located on Lehigh's campus. And this event is brought to you today through a partnership with the Notation series presented by the Creative Writing Department at Lehigh, as well as in partnership with the Lehigh University Libraries and the Art Galleries. I'd like to thank Stephanie Powell-Watts, author and associate professor of English at Lehigh, and Heather Simoneau, the humanities librarian for the Lehigh University Libraries, for partnering with us to bring this program with you today. I'd also like to thank our featured readers who will be joining us, Julia Randolph-Flagg and Alicia Ahmeda. Just gonna move forward here. Just an overview of this evening's activities, just an overview of our Doing Democracy exhibition, which is on view at the Lehigh University Art Galleries. We're going to go through a poem and prompt with Heather, and then we will be turning it over to Stephanie to introduce our readers. We'd like to leave a few minutes at the end for reflection. We hope you'll stay on with us this evening throughout the full program. Like I said, it will be recorded and we will share it out on the Lehigh University Art Gallery website. And if you would like, we welcome you to participate by unmuting yourself or adding into the chat box. We would love to hear from you. So Doing Democracy is an exhibition that's on view in the galleries currently, as well as on the South Bethlehem Greenway. It is an exhibition that was put together from students from various departments across the university. Students helped us to curate and select from 2,000 photographs that were donated to the university from George Stephanopoulos down to about 107, based on themes and subjects that were relevant to the election year, to the community and to the university, and just relevant and timely topics. We were able to work with the students to kind of design clusters or themes. So this is an example of what you'll see in the galleries of how we've grouped photographs together and how not only does an individual photograph tell a story, but how when placed together, works of art can really tell a larger story and influence each other. The photographs within the collection really span a variety of topics from the 20th century, the civil rights movement, leaders that have really been an inspiration for hope and helping to pave the way for future generations. We have ideas of kind of race and everyday Americans and the fight for justice and what democracy really means to each of us. This exhibition is also offered in partnership with the Southside Arts District. And now that the weather is getting nice, we hope that you will explore the South Bethlehem Greenway, where you can see reproductions of the works of art and also scan the images to hear from fellow students about their impressions of the photographs. You can also view all of these works on our website at LUAG.org, where we have also a selection of the 17,000 works of art that are in our collection that you can explore for research and study. So we hope you will take a look at that. I'm going to turn it over to Heather now, who is our humanities librarian and a wonderful resource, to lead us through poetry and also a writing exercise. So Heather, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. So the assignment I was given was to go through the Doing Democracy exhibit and look for an image that really spoke to me and pair it with a poem so that we could have a short discussion. And so I found this poem by Josephine Miles, and the title is 7500, and I will read it and then give you a little context. I cannot tell you what a bargain this is. Built at a cost of $7,000, selling for $7,500, and all the utilities in, and trees. Landscaped front and back, strings up for lawn, tiles, wrought iron fixtures, entrance hall with an echo, 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 beamed ceiling, and a southern feeling. Marvelous in this spring month, in this empty field. Out of the already forgotten hammers, hands compressed, so like a snowdrop sprung, white, delicate, and new, with mountain view. And to give you some context of this poem, it has to do with I don't know if you want to go to the image. Um, yeah. So it has to do with suburbia, and the form of the poem mimics the typical pitch that people who were potential buyers of one of the suburban homes would hear. So they would get all these selling points. But it just kind of spoke to me as she gets towards the end and she's selling the lot. It's 7,500, but you're only paying 7,500. You're getting this great lot. Even trees come with it, which sounds kind of crazy. But the reason I looked at that poem and this image was this particular image, and you'll see a short video with context, was taken in 1972 in a suburb. And I grew up in a suburb just like this. And in 1972, we had just moved in. I was about 4. And the suburb was Levittown, Pennsylvania. And it had a similar creation where it was spinach fields. And William Levitt came and bought the spinach fields and made this entire, 70,000 people, citizen town, so that GIs coming back from the war would have a place to live, so that the employees from US Steel would have a place to live. And it was really built as this idyllic town where each section of the town had a name. I lived in Pinewood, so you'd associate with Pinewood, and there was Red Rose Gate, and each one had a name. Each little section had your own pool and your school. I went to Walt Disney Elementary School, so it was this big kind of narrative. But it was a cool place. I could walk to the pool, walk to school. As a kid, it was a cool place. And when I got older and started to learn about Levittown, I realized that there were like a lot of really bad things about it. Namely, the biggest one is that people of color were actively kept out. They were not permitted to buy homes in Levittown. And when the first Black family bought a home, it was they were really harassed. The KKK was involved, and it was just horrible thing. So when I'm looking at this image, I was kind of thinking a little bit about that. So do you want to go to the reflection slide, please? So this is the reflection slide to think a little bit about what your neighborhood looks like. If you can remember one of your birthday parties from when you were a young child, is there anything that this party has in common with your birthday party, or if there's anything different? And then when you reflect, I'd like you to think about how post-war suburban neighborhoods were, the words that William Levitt used was scientifically constructed to be these idyllic places to work and live. And what do you think were some of the long-term impacts of keeping people of color from purchasing suburban homes? And we'll give you a few minutes to reflect on that and write. We'll give it another minute. Okay, so I think that that's been, I timed it, it was about 5 minutes. Would anybody like to share their reflection? To read their response?
I'll just add, you're welcome to unmute yourself, or you can add your response in the chat box. I'll be happy to read it for you.
I just kind of got to what does your neighborhood look like? I grew up in Hawaii, and there's a huge disparity between the local people on island and the more and people who have moved there. But I have two parents who are teachers, and I live in a lower socioeconomic class neighborhood there. And something that I think of whenever I think of home is how many people are always outside of their homes. There's always kids that are playing and people walking their dogs, and just you kind of have a close relationship with them. And I think that, like, something I think of is the loudness of my neighborhood. There's kids that are driving their four-wheelers and just kind of like, so yeah, I think that that's something that is kind of, I find important, is that kind of mix of people and how you are kind of forced to interact with them.
Nice. So that's good. You focused really on this sense of community that is in the picture, you know, so celebrating, you know, a milestone, obviously this little girl's birthday. So yeah, I like what you said about your neighborhood being loud.
I love that idea of being outside too. And, you know, as we're welcoming spring, it's something that sounds wonderful. But, you know, as a child, I remember having all of my birthday parties were at a roller skating rink. If they weren't outside, they were at a roller skating rink. And I just remember that opportunity to be with friends and to invite all your friends from your class. So it really, in that idea of sense of community, it was really tied to the school that you went to, like you said, Heather, and kind of the community that was built around that.
One thing that I was thinking about when she was saying that her community was loud was today, actually. I think all of us at Lehigh, you know, in Bethlehem, it's a nice day out. And, you know, today you were saying four-wheelers, it made me remind me of some kids that were riding on their four-wheelers today. And I kind of got that sense of community. Like I was on my roof today and just like seeing people go by and just like the loudness of the neighborhood of Bethlehem that we all live in together. So I think a lot of us, especially today, can get that sense of kind of community that you were talking about and the loudness that you were talking about. So that's also nice. And that's the first thing that came to my mind when you said that.
Yeah, and the houses themselves, speaking of closeness, they're pretty close. I mean, where I live now, my nearest neighbor, I mean, it's like, I can have a good argument with my husband and they won't hear. It's a pretty far away on a rural road. But being this close, you are forced to be in community with your neighbors. And I would like to thank the people who got off their roofs and showed up today because it is nice and warm outside. So I know that we have, people are reacting. I would like to think a little bit about that question about some of the long-term impacts of keeping people of color from purchasing these suburban homes. One of the things that I mentioned was that Levittown and often these other communities, they were constructed to have like a place for, US Steel employees to live. I mean, if you wouldn't let somebody live in the home nearby, the place of employment, I mean, what does that mean? What kind of barriers would there be then for employment to US Steel? Like this kind of ripple effect.
That's also a reflection of Bethlehem's history too, right? And who the steel employed and how that shaped the community around the steel factory.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they're not like this anymore, but there were different national churches around Bethlehem reflecting the different waves of immigration. But home ownership is also a really important part of building generational wealth. And so if like I have a home, my parents have a home, they leave their home to me, I leave that accumulated wealth, and you build wealth through generations. So that's another thing to think about, when you think about not being able to buy a home or a home in certain places.
Yeah, I was gonna say that in my neighborhood, everyone rents their home, which is kind of similar to what you're talking about, is that you can't really settle down there the same way, and it feels less secure.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you have a rental home, you can't borrow against it, where if you have a home that you could borrow against the equity and maybe start a small business. I mean, there are a lot of different implications to not owning a home. I mean, not everybody has to own, but there are really important things that come along with home ownership. So good point. So I do have a question for Julia, because it's interesting to me. Like you say, a lot of the people rent. Do the people who own those homes that they rent, do they live in Hawaii as well, or are they completely not
They
part of the community?
they're not part of the community, no. Normally, they kind of travel back and forth from Hawaii to somewhere on the mainland, and then they want to retire back in Hawaii.
Great. So it's like an investment property.
Yeah, similarly, well, I guess not so similarly, but I grew up kind of traveling the world, like until ended up going to boarding school in the US. My family lived in 4 different countries since my childhood. Like I wasn't born in the US either. And I guess that was mainly due to my dad's job. But because of that, we traveled so much and we never really had the opportunity to actually like buy a house until my parents kind of settled down more so when I was like 16, 17. But it was a similar thing where you didn't really want to buy a house because you didn't know how long you were going to stay in that country.
So when you had that very interesting experience at a young age of living in these different countries, but not having a permanent space like root, what sort of things did you guys do to build community with your neighbors?
So I guess because of my father's job, we always ended up with being with people who we kind of know, or like knew previously from other countries. But I think a big thing for us was like religion. So I'm Jewish, and we were always part of a Chabad, which is like kind of like a church, but for like Jewish people. So wherever we went, we kind of, I guess, found a home within that. And the Jewish community, when you travel abroad to I lived in Hong Kong, I lived in Thailand, and the communities there are so small that it's kind of easy to just like go there and fit in.
Right, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. It's kind of cool. I wouldn't think that you'd be able to go from different countries and still manage to be in this kind of traveling community. So cool. Stacy, I know that we have like a few minutes left before you wanted to move on. Did you want to show the second little video that we have, or did you?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. For context for this photograph was taken by Bill Owens. It's of his wife and family, and it is part of a book called Suburbia. And in the exhibition, as part of the curation process, the students that were involved from history, journalism, communications, art, architecture, and design, they, and the English department as well, they helped us to create these narrated videos, and our wonderful intern Ray Ukan put them together. So this will give you some context for the photograph and this student's particular point of view on the photographer.
This black and white photograph by Bill Owens depicts his family in a California household celebrating a child's birthday. His wife, Janet Owens, is holding a cake for a young girl to blow the candles out while other family members and children watch with delight. The image candidly depicts a classic white suburban household during this era. Pure joy and bliss are displayed throughout the photograph. They are carefree and happy to celebrate during a time that is historically underlined with oppression. As a photojournalist, American photographer Bill Owens put together a book titled Suburbia, which was shot over the summer of 1972. The 1970s was an era of movements including women's rights, gay rights, and environmental movements, along with the ongoing Vietnam War. Owens said, "This book is about my friends and the world I live in." Throughout his work on this book, he visited hundreds of homes and came in contact with several different communities. We are all able to see Owens' perception of the world through his photographs.
So a great, I think, interpretation from Tori Hemsmith on this photograph. And Bill Owens has a variety of different bodies of works, but this particular book is this body of work, Suburbia, is one that he is most famous for really just capturing the everyday and for the appreciation of those little things. And I think that's a really beautiful thing in this exhibition. Not only are there these really critical moments in time, but also kind of some of these moments that may have been overlooked, and really highlights the way that photographers use their camera as a tool for really exposing us to all different kinds of stories, you know, both the seen and unseen. So a really great video. We have lots more on our website at LUAG.org, if I haven't mentioned our website before. But it is my pleasure now to turn the mic over to Stephanie Powell-Watts, who is going to introduce our readers for this evening. And we're so grateful for joining us, Julia and Alicia. So I'll turn it over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm Stephanie Powell-Watts. I direct the creative writing program. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and thank you so much for coming, everyone. I love the photo that you presented, and I love what you said, Heather. It requires us to kind of hold two thoughts, kind of disparate thoughts in our heads at the same time, that there is a beauty in the mundane, in the domestic, in this little moments that probably most of us recognize from our own childhoods, you know, but there's also another story that's maybe hidden, that it's not obvious. And that brings me to the work of two excellent poets that we are highlighting tonight. First, Alicia Ahmeda will read for us, and then Julia Randolph-Flagg. And afterwards, if we have a few minutes, we would love to field some questions for the poets. But So please thank you for coming, and please give your attention first to Alicia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for making it. I also want to thank Lehigh Art Galleries, Stacy, Professor Stephanie Watts, Professor Bob Watts, and Heather for putting together this event and for having us present our work. All right, so I'm going to be reading 2 poems for you today. The first is titled Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth was just recently published in a journal called Bellevue Literary Review. They're an independent literary journal that focuses on issues of health, illness, and the body. And so my poem focuses on the situation of diabetes and the ways in which the perception of it gets caught between thinking about it as a lifestyle condition or the other way, which is in an intergenerational disease. So the speaker is kind of reflecting about that. All right. Sweet Tooth. My mother reminds me sugar is the culprit. Our family history is a map of sweetened veins. This is why we never succeed, drugged into a never-ending solution. Our fix for money problems, home problems, love problems has been to lick at the wounds because of the sugar there. The molasses of pain is why we get nowhere except in our chairs with dying limbs. And according to her, sweets must be eaten only in the morning, when calories can be burnt off, that there is such a thing as reversal of the wounds we give ourselves, that sugar, like cement, builds structures out on streets and can then be demolished. But I hesitate when my mother reminds me there are alternatives, like stevia, or even better, the brown crumbling body of jaggery. Knowing it to be sweet, but a different kind of sweet, once consumed, I think of several wounds that won't feed today. Okay. My second poem is titled A Blizzard. It's a poem.
Alicia, that was really good. I just want to say.
Thank you. Was that Greg? Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, that was me.
My second poem is a poem I'm currently working on. It's a snow poem, and it kind of ambles between many situations. So not just the snow that we've been receiving a lot in Bethlehem here the last few weeks, but also the ways in which we relate to water and the kind of discomfort that we have in this sort of water that we can't control, the form of water that we can't control. All right, so a blizzard. A blizzard is winter's monsoon window wiping the sky, turning water into crystals, into sentences on the road, where some clump into whole paragraphs, while others phrase into icicles looming over our heads for days like impatient questions. Is winter's monsoon an ending or beginning? Will this arrival unstill the pandemic's winter? Will it be enough to shovel the layers and layers till I find the submerged earth in myself? But what do I know about what gets buried in paragraphs of snow, leaving wrist-thin roads for all passage? And somewhere in all of that waiting, the long sentence indoors turns into a chapter without grip, one where no path is in sight. On the other hand, the sparrows and squirrels know everything. They recede, emerging when air stills after downpour. A path is only possible if all of them can endure what is incoming. And what is incoming is the life-giving element, water, who in choosing the sharp shape of snowflakes shrugs out of the language costume we have stitched for her, the names we have for her use and being useful, to siphon and to measure into a glass, a dam, reservoirs of plastic water bottles. But snow and other forms of unruly and unwilling water are quick to slow down the rest of us. The rest of us, being snow-worn ourselves for days, movement weaves into a full stop in this flood language of water wanted out of the way. Here, I find I may be no different from the hedges shaking free despite windless air, their branches emerging like nails from ice-gloved bodies. Thank you.
It would be unfair for you to read those poems in our poetry class, Alicia. Those are just too good.
Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. So, Julia?
Yes,
Okay, great.
those were amazing as always. So a lot of my class is here and has already heard my first poem and a bit of the background, but I am a senior who's going to be having an exhibition and a final product of an illustrated poetry book. And I'm going to be doing it from different women of mythology and legend from their perspectives that will give them more autonomy and a new voice. So I'm going to do my first poem. This is To My Mother, Demeter, on my recent disappearance. When the flowers closed and the moon materialized over the rustling golden stalks of grain that brushed along my legs, and the air shifted, coldly wrapped around my shoulders, I found solace in the ink dark that drew me in despite your warnings, of being too curious, of wanting more than the life crafted for me in flowers and bound by beauty. Barefoot, I strode into the sightless depths of corruption and found purity among souls that could not hide, and rivers that flow with command that does not reach me. I am more than just a maiden. I hear the change of my name, Persephone, and if this is chaos, then it fits me better. And then the next poem is going to be from her mother's perspective, and this is Demeter's response. My daughter, when you came screaming into this world with wide eyes and clenched fists, you reached up and squeezed my thumb, and I knew you were a force of nature. Perhaps every mother feels clutching her child that was once safely in her womb, but is now exposed. Her heart roams independently with its own desires and spirit determined to fight for a place in this world. But I have seen too much, with the relentless ticking of time and seen how it treats precious things. So I've built the sanctuary of goodness and growth from soil and nurtured you joyfully. Still, you have left me, and as I grieve, the earth reflects my sorrow and your new home, for when you walked into death's door, you condemned me as well. Each year, I now look up at that full moon that you bravely saw as a fresh start to try and understand what compelled you to go so far away. Thank you.
I love that line, death's door and demanded. Just the sound of that was really good.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful work, both of you. I would love to open up the floor to questions for the poets, and please in the chat if you'd like to, or just unmute yourself.
So I had a question for Julia in terms of, so we in her poetry class have heard the first poem. So the second poem, is her mother like, so her, at first when I was first hearing that poem, I was assuming that the mom was like kind of accepting that her daughter had left, but then towards the end I was like, obviously she was very upset that she left and stuff like that. So kind of what was her like exact emotion, if you could define it, toward towards her daughter leaving?
Yeah, that was really hard. As writing the Persephone poem, it was a lot easier to be an angsty teenager and just kind of be the daughter who wants to leave the shackles. And then going into that mother perspective was so complicated, right? Because she loves her daughter, but when her daughter leaves during the months to visit Hades, in some places, it's the drought period, but here we think of it as the winter. So the entire time she's mourning and she wanted her daughter back, she went to Zeus and was like, bring her back. But Persephone, in this at least retelling, she wanted to go. And so I think that she is trying to accept it, but she also feels abandoned and just kind of heartbroken.
There's a question for Alicia. How did you come up with a comparison between snow and words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters? It's beautiful.
Thank you for that question. It came spontaneously, if I may say so. At least the first sort of move into thinking about snow as paragraphs and then the icicles as questions. This was my first, I'm an international student from India. And so for me, the snow, at least the snowfall this year in particular, was really, it took me by surprise. And at the same time, I've been missing the kind of heavy monsoons back in India. And so it almost felt like I received the rains, but in another form. And so just, I was paying attention to the way the snow sort of clumps in places, some of it are doing, where we push the snow to out of the way, but also like the icicles that we're walking under and kind of cautious about them accidentally falling on us. So it feels like an open question every time you're near one. Yeah, and so I took from that and I allowed that to lead the language as I was writing this out. I have a question for Julia, if I may, if I'm allowed to ask. Julia, I would like to know more about your process of not just these poems, but like what else is going into the collection. How does your art relate to all of this? I know it's a broad question, but really, I was so excited to hear the response poem, to have the mother speak back. And in some ways, I thought that was kind of similar to the tension in my poem, where you have this mother and the daughter kind of like figuring out this complicated situation, a family history that is complicated. And it seems like that's also underlying this kind of response between mother and daughter in your poem. And I kind of just want to know more about your project. I'm a fan.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's been a process, and so it's kind of constantly evolving. As for my process of writing these poems, I think that I do a lot of research and someone just kind of hits me and I get really interested in them as a person. And then I enter this space of, I was in a few plays in high school and I kind of related to that. I think I try and become this person, and how is this poem going to sound different from the next one? And so currently I'm working on a Medusa poem, which is incredibly emotional, and she has a story that makes me extremely angry, but also just I feel like I need to do her justice. And so yeah, it's been really interesting kind of entering both the poet and also the perspective of a new person. And as for the style and art, I will try and show you kind of the idea. So it'll be different pages that look like this. This is an example of the Persephone poem. And I have a Medusa in the works. I don't know if it's, hold on. Yeah, I just really like kind of having, I'm a very visual person, so it seemed like a very natural step for me to be a design student, a poetry student, and an art student. And when there's an exhibition, it would be awesome if you can come, or anyone else in this class. Yeah. Thank you.
We will be sharing information out to all of you that are here this evening about Julia's exhibition later this year, for sure.
I had a question about the revisions. So I'm in your poetry class as well. And so I remember when you guys read, I guess maybe it was the rough drafts, or maybe it was another revision that you guys read in class when we were doing the first workshop poems. But so I was just curious, I guess, the process that you guys use to revise your poems and to make it to what they are now.
You can go first.
Michaela, I don't have a straightforward answer, but so when we had the workshop, I kind of paid attention to what y'all were picking up on, what were some of the things y'all liked about it. And from there, I kind of kept going back to places where I felt it was incomplete. Even as I presented it in class that day, I felt that there were parts of it missing. So the first version had just one question after the icicles, and I felt that was incomplete, and I wanted to sort of grapple with the sense of not knowing what the future holds for us. Some of the other poems that were around the pandemic, that were about the pandemic in our class, also sort of moved into that poem, because I realized that the situation of being indoors because of the snow was in some sense an extension of the kind of being indoors because of the pandemic. And so the kind of grappling with discomfort we have, or we face as human beings, these everyday questions, I felt that wasn't there in the first draft, and I wanted to go back to those. Yeah, I think that is those were some of the few impulses I worked through.
Yeah, as an artist and designer, we have critique all the time. And so you get very used to being like, this is my perfect masterpiece, and then just having it torn to pieces. So I think you have to kind of learn, one, to not take it too seriously, but really listen to what people are saying. I have 2 English teacher parents, so that's the first round of edits. I don't know what I'm going to do or what I would do without my mom. And then Professor Watts edits it. My advisor Lucy looks at it. So it's just kind of finding what is in common besides my obvious grammatical errors, and being able to be like, this I really want to stay, even though people might not totally understand it. This is important to me, whereas this I think I can change but still get the meaning across. And so both of the poems I read, I am still editing. They are not finished, but I do have a hard time, especially with poetry, being able to make differences, because you read it out loud so many times that it feels kind of finalized, but it never is. So yeah, I hope that answers.
Totally. Thank you, guys.
Question from the chat. Are there ever moments when you edit a piece and then decide to go back to the original one to present, publish, as that is more your voice?
That's hard. That's hard to answer, because I think that, as I said before, I kind of already make those decisions while editing them. So I hardly ever be like, this is finished, and then last minute go back. But I think it is really interesting seeing my voice completely at first and how it changes throughout time and with edits and stuff. And although I might love my first draft, I think that that is something that's more for me, and as something that you're sharing with other people, you do need to take into consideration what resonates with them. And so I think that although I like the first draft and I like looking back at those, I hardly ever change it back.
Yeah, I agree with Julia. You know, there in revisions you end up changing things, and the task is really to try and make sure the things you want to be there for the reader remain through all of those edits, right? And so I think I don't believe as much in an original voice, but in your first draft only, but one that extends across time. A poem also at some point belongs less to the poet than it does to the world that receives it. And I believe that poems speak to people, and the poets should allow that kind of control over what remains authentic and what, you know, how it's deciphered. And so at some point, as a writer, you need to stop and you need to let it go out there, and all of it is really parts of you, even if it didn't look like that in the beginning.
Well, if we don't have any more questions for our presenters, I know it's been, I'm sure, a long, beautiful day for all of us. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you, Heather, for leading us through the exercise. Thank you, Julia and Alicia, for reading such incredible and inspiring and beautiful poetry. We're grateful that you were willing to share with us this evening. I will put one last plug for our upcoming programs. We have the Toni Morrison Book Club, where we're reading Sula, coming up on March 25th. Taste of Art with Café de Lodge. We'll be exploring Cuban art and the Cuban sandwich with our local restaurant, Café de Lodge. April is National Poetry Month. So our next notations is on April 8th, and we hope that you will join us for that. I will follow up with everyone with an email with our recording for this evening. And we hope that you will join us for all of our upcoming programs. I don't know if either of my co-presenters had any last remarks and want to take the mic. No last remarks. Well, thank you. Enjoy the warmth while it's here before the rain tomorrow. And then we look forward to seeing you out on campus and out in the community soon. We're getting closer to that. So thank you all again for sharing with us this evening, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wonderful program. Thank you both.
Oh,